Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Hand-Eye Supply Curiosity Club. I am your host this evening, Tobias Berglinger. Will is not here this evening. Together, we have a number of curious and exciting topics to share with you. Our series highlights an eclectic group of speakers across a broad range of subjects in the areas of culture, design, science, technology, art, fabrication techniques, and lost common knowledge. As attendees of the Hand-Eye Supply Curiosity Club, you are now all members, provided you adhere to our philosophy. Ex curiositas scientia. We pledge to learn without prejudice in pursuit of our mutual goal, perpetual noviceship. We admit that it is impossible to know everything about anything, and thus we remain perpetually curious and perpetually novice. And now I'm very happy to introduce Sheldon Renan. Sheldon was alerted to the growing importance of connectivity in the early 90s while working on special projects at Xerox PARC. Previously, Renan had founded the Pacific Film Archive at UC Berkeley while writing the first history of experimental media. This led to producing interactive video discs and creating immersive interactive media spaces for theme parks and technology events. Currently, Renan is writing a new book on the future of connectivity. And here he is.
Well, I'm really excited to be here because a lot of the people who helped develop these ideas further are in the room today. And no time to acknowledge them now, but I sure appreciate them being here because without the kind of geek community here in Portland, we wouldn't be as far along with this. I'm here today to talk about why everything wants to be connected and what that means for makers. And what we're talking about actually is what I call the new laws of netness. People in technology have always been looking for this kind of magic formula, these looking for the next exponential. And the first exponential, which really changed things for us all, was Moore's Law, which the ability to get stuff out of silicon-based technology, semiconductors, doubled every year to 2 years. And that's actually driven a huge amount of change in the world, not just in technology. Then pretty soon along came Bob Metcalfe, and who applied exponential thinking to connectivity and was able to prove with a mathematical formula that the more things you connected, the more value you got on a network, and that allowed you to leverage the network effect. And it really came out of him doing a sales presentation in which he showed his sales guys that if they were able to sell 3 pieces of network equipment rather than 2 to the customer actually got more value. It was a multiplier. Whether it was full exponentiality is anybody's guess. Reed came along, Reed's law, also called the law of the pack, and added communities and social networks as a magnifying effect to that. And he actually said that Metcalfe's law was too conservative in what he said. Metcalfe's law and Reed's law are about networks and what you can do with networks. But increasingly, we're beginning to get a much more complicated view of what connectivity is. And when I started getting involved in it, I thought it seemed very, very simple. And then I began to realize what everybody who works in the field realizes, that it's connectivity, its effects and its costs and its purposes is a mile deep mud puddle. You step into it thinking, oh, well, I'll just walk on through this and get to the other side. And before you know it, you're over your head. So what I want to talk about is what happens when things connect beyond networks and connectivity begins to become ubiquitous, and everything begins to connect to everybody, and everything begins to connect, starting over one network, hopping to another network, or when one network goes down, the other network pops up, and you begin to get into this fabric of connectivity in which no network rules, and in which network rules don't even apply. Something else begins to apply. So I like to say that the networks giveth and networks taketh away. And by that I mean that almost all the thinking about connectivity has centered on networks, because at least you know what you're dealing with. It's usually a wire line. When it went to radio, it got a little bit more black art, but you still were able to diagram it in a way that made you feel comfortable. But the problem is that networks do make it easy to connect and to optimize connectivity when they have approved connections. But they tend to block non-approved connections, and there are a lot of things that can go wrong to make something a non-approved connection. Or users can't remember their password, or people who are supposed to be guardians of the network can't remember the password they assigned to it, so they can't tell you how to get onto it. Or the websites have out-of-date certificates, and you can go on and on. So what we end up with is a kind of a rickety, when you're with a network, yes, you're connected, but you don't know for how long and at what speed. And nowadays we all have software. I have a software on my iPhone that lets me track the speed of connectivity dynamically and charts how it changes. And let me tell you, it's Mr. Toad's wild ride. So what we're beginning to talk about is moving to a post-network age. Originally we had the idea of networks, and that became fabrics, this whole fabric of intertangled and interwoven services and connections, and then we end up with what I call netness, because that seems to be the difference between our past and our future, and that seems to be the thing that offers us the most opportunity. And netness is really not about networks. Netness is about connectivity itself. If you want to think of reality, I'm sorry we're not on top of a butte drinking beer at midnight and have this conversation, but if you want to think about reality, reality is this incredibly accurate sensor net in which everything is in some way connected. But if you want to take a subset of that, the market effect, if you want to talk about markets, there is no single network. Most of the information that comes in that affects and shapes things doesn't go over what we would call a network. They are connected, but we don't know. We're just dealing with the experimental results, and we need to be able to leverage a greater sense of connectivity. And when we do, lots of interesting things happen. So, starting. Well, it says Moore's law, Metcalfe's law, Reed's law, and then it says the new laws of netness. And then because in 2 books I found the term Renan's law, and for reasons of vanity and narcissism, I now like to throw that in every so often. I didn't insist on it, but I sure like it when I see it, because I've been working on this since 1994, and wrote the first version of Laws of Netness, which got a lot of tomatoes thrown at me in 2002. So, and what Renan's law says is that the more things are connected, the better things work. The smarter things are, the safer things are, and the more opportunity you have to succeed. And people are really not aware that connectivity has become probably the most important factor in giving you resources to create new opportunities, to find new ways to do things. And the reason people aren't aware of how fast connectivity is taking hold and changing, and is really changing fundamentally our reality, is because it's taking place in a lot of different vectors. And most people live in a silo. They look straight ahead, or they look straight up. They don't look to the side. They don't look at all the things happening at the same time. So you've got these 6 vectors of growth. The first is you have this growing number of networks. We're now aware that there are networks at every scale, from atoms to a number of different networks in a given cell and molecules. And when you look at a book on data visualization, you'll see a network, and it looks pretty, but until you read the caption, you don't actually know whether you're looking at the way in which parts of a cell are connected, or the way in which a social network is functioning in an organization, or is it the way the universe is the internet is wired? They all have a similar look and feel. The problem is it doesn't capture a lot of the interactions that are going on. The second thing is that you have this great increase in the number of connected parts. It used to be that cars, for example, the primary cost of a car was in the steel, the glass, and the rubber. Starting about 14 years ago, automobiles now more money is spent on producing automobiles on the wiring, on the electronics, and most cars now have hundreds, if not thousands, of semiconductors, and all of them are working together. The third is the number of connected people, then the number of connected places, locations, the number of points at which you can bring up awareness is increasing, and then the number of connected things. And then the real thing is that just escapes all of us usually is the frequency and intimacy of connections. Suddenly we're finding out that we thought that things we thought were private, or things we thought that we didn't want anybody to know about, people have known exactly where we've been, where we're going, and a great deal about us. You can now look up a marketing organization, and it seems like they've been had a stethoscope up to the wall and listening to your life if you look at all the things that they are. Some of those things you gave them permission to do, and a lot of the things they just assumed they had permission to do, and some of those things they really went ahead and did on their own. But the fact is that connectivity has grown so much that we're not really aware of the degree to which we live in a kind of mesh of connectivity. So as a result of this, connectivity is really changing. The nature of connectivity is changing. And as it becomes ubiquitous, you begin to see systems becoming fields. And I have to tell you that of all the things that I've talked to people about, to people like Anselm Hook, this is the thing which really grabs them. Because if you move from networks into the beginnings of what I call connectivity fields, and you're moving towards something which we can call the field, and that is where connectivity is connectivity that you can hook into, that's explicit connectivity, making it pervasive, making it everywhere, making it sustainable, making it function as a natural force like gravity, really changes a lot of things. But that's what's happening. Some of you have traveled in places like Colombia, and you know that there's free Wi-Fi virtually in a lot of places there. And that's what when we increase connectivity, we increase opportunity, and so the field presents a real chance to change, to improve what you can do in almost everything that you do. The second thing that happens is that we have this new class or degree of connectivity evolving. When I used to work as a marketing guy in technology, the engineer would always call me aside for the talk. He would sit me down and explain to me that there were 3 degrees of connectivity. The first was loosely connected, the second was closely connected, and the third was embedded. And then they would tell me what their product was, and then they would show me the product chart, which showed me how the connectivity was evolving. And it was always assumed that connectivity was better as you went from loosely connected to closely connected to embedded, because it was more reliable, more certain. But in fact, we're now seeing the evolution of a 4th class or type of connectivity, and we're all in it already. And I've been using the term entangled, and I recently read a paper from Intel, which also, Intel Anthropology, is also beginning to use the word entangled for users. And in entangled, you have a situation where people are connected by so many different overlapping streams and networks, and when one thing breaks, they're connected by another, and they end up existing in a kind of suboptimal attention span in which they're always sort of connected all the time to a bunch of people, and it has a very deep and profound effect on the way we're living today. So there's one person who knows, Sherry Montgomery, And she, if you ever check her, people put their condition on Google Talk to tell you what their condition is. Her condition is likely to say, sorta here, or kind of around. And what she means is that she's checking it back and forth. What happens when you have these online communities of entangled users, it literally begins to affect the perception of time and space. People actually like to be connected. They want to be connected. It increases safety, it increases resources. You can always find company, you can always get help if you're in trouble, and you can get to the people that you want to get to in a hurry much faster since this has begun to emerge. But what happens is that people begin, over time, to share time. So I have a lot of friends that I work with. There's Bram in Delhi. There's Lee Dryberg in Ljubljana. There's Nancy, who's here today, but usually is in Rome. And I try to remember the time zones, and I think they try to remember the time zones. But we're all sharing time. And more than that, you begin to get a situation where people begin to slow down the perception of time so that they can share time with people. They like to be synced up with all these different people. And as you become entangled, something happens which is not unlike quantum entanglement. In quantum entanglement, at very low sizes, matter can be in more than one place at once. It's called superpositioning. It can literally be photographed with electron microscopes, and that's what's beginning to happen to us. We're members of multiple communities at the same time. We have presence in multiple places at the same time. And it's of course complex, but it gives you a lot of opportunities. It gives you a much richer life, even if you tend to be a little fragmented some of the time. Right now, people are trying to, quantum physicists are trying to decide whether it's not just the perception of time that's changing. Because one of the things we're beginning to understand is that time is not an arrow. Time is kind of an ecosystem. It all levels out in the end, but it goes slower or faster under different conditions. And one of those conditions may be connectivity. Something that Nancy Boyd and I and a guy at an institute down for advanced study of quantum physics down at UC Santa Barbara have been dialoguing about. And we literally asked a series of questions to their senior person in quantum cosmology. And 3 out of the 4 questions, he said, these are serious questions that need to be thought about. So it isn't just that time appears to be shifted by connectivity. It may actually change time slightly. So the third thing that's happening in connectivity, and this is a big one, is that these 2 worlds, which are the world of atoms and the world of bits, are beginning to become one. It used to be that there were the 2 domains. And if you were at Xerox, for example, you always talked about the paper domain and the digital domain. If you read Nick, what's his name's book about called Being Digital, he talked about what the difference between the world of atoms and the world of bits, and what happens when you're dealing with bits as opposed to dealing with atoms. But the fact is that those things are being merged. That most of us, a lot of what we do is now enhanced by these 2 worlds coming together. And these 2 worlds are not going to, unless something knocks us back into the Stone Age, we're not ever going to, these worlds are not going to be separate. Right now, for the past 2 years, there's been a lot of interest in augmented reality, AR, and people have looked at it as a kind of novel thing, which adds some functionality. But in point of fact, we're headed for a world where augmented reality, digitally augmented capabilities will be the new normal. And people will begin to function with a lot more capabilities, a lot more opportunities than they ever had before. And all this depends on connectivity. So everybody's been focused, thank you, on the human world and human technology when they think about connectivity. But increasingly, as we move from classical physics into quantum physics, and we begin to understand that we live in some form of multiverse. We don't know quite how. We don't know how they're connected. We don't know how all those parts of reality connect. We don't even have a taxonomy of connectivity that's ever been specified. We begin to understand that connectivity is much deeper than we think, that it's not just a matter of plugging clients onto a network, that it goes all the way down to every level and every domain of reality and matter. And Carver Mead, who is one of this person who's had a large effect on all of us. He was the man who was talking with Gordon Moore, who is a person who created Gordon Moore dialogued with to get to the idea of what became Moore's Law. He's the man Moore hired to do the research for Moore's Law, most of which I found out recently, never came out. And what we're finding about what didn't come out is pretty interesting. I'll talk about that later. And he's the man who invented things like the large array silicon. He's the guy who put Intel on business. He lives in Seattle now, but he brought a book out called Collective Electrodynamics. Well, the term collective set off a buzzer with me, and so even though it was full of formulas, which I couldn't read, I read it, and in the end was an epilogue in which he talked about his deepest feelings and beliefs about the physical world that he was experiencing, and his mentor and his relationship with Feynman, Richard Feynman, the great physicist. And in that is this statement: the electron wave function in atoms is particularly sensitive to coupling with other electrons. It is coupled either to faraway matter in the universe or to other electrons in a resonant cavity or or other local structure. And the first thing that electron tends to want to do once it knows it's going to stick around for a while and not decay is find other electrons to connect to and communicate with and do something with. So what we're learning bit by bit is that all forms of matter, organic and non-organic, want to be connected. And this is not science, this is more like what you would call a thought experiment. But the reason for that is simple. Nothing. No thing could do anything by itself. Everything, if it's a mineral, if it's a rock, if it's a chemical, everything connects, communicates, and collaborates with other things in order to do anything at all. And if you want an example from recent research, it's been discovered that when minerals come in contact with living systems, the number of minerals in that kind of ecosystem, time flow ecosystem, tends to double. Minerals themselves begin to have more opportunity to do more things. So this is true, and Feynman says it's also true of atoms. And in his lectures on surface tension, he talks about the need of atoms to connect to one another. And so when I used to say everything wants to be connected, all the engineers would stand up and want to leave the room and say, things don't want anything. Well, Aristotle would beg to differ. He says that everything has a kind of a character, kind of proclivity, things it needs. They got needs just like Maslow had needs. And the thing that they really need, the thing that they can't do anything without, is connecting. It's a basic strategy of existence. Whether you're alive, dead, sensate, or a pebble on a beach. So when we talk about netness, we're not talking, and everything wanting to be connected, we're not talking about connecting more things to networks. And we're not talking about connecting more networks, which is what people usually talk about when they're talking about connectivity problems. We're talking about connecting everything. And when I mean everything, I mean connecting everything at every level, from particles to planets. Because those networks and beyond the planets now. Vint Cerf, the man who we like to call the father of the internet, although a lot of people worked on the internet, and the basic principles behind the internet appear to have come from Europe, not America, or just that research is just beginning to come out now, is already planning for an internet that's interplanetary, and it won't stop. And the other thing, which I haven't used in the slide, referred to in the slide, is the Internet of Things. That begins to be a much larger internet, and that is the internet that is the greatest opportunity for all of us, and happens to be the subject, the problem that we have to deal with if we're going to survive into another century in the form in which we live today. So what makes connectivity valuable? I'll talk about this very briefly. People talk about the network effect, but there are actually two things which seem to give network, make connectivity important. One is the externalities effect, and that is that in externalities you connect to something that's connected to something else, that's connected to something else, that's connected to something else. So what that does is it connects you to networks, knowledge, resources, and markets, and effects that exist far beyond your own that you didn't know you had. Sometimes those are positive externalities, and sometimes those are negative externalities. The very concept comes out of 17th century forestry, trying to establish the value of forestry properties so that they could be valued commercially. And the other thing which nobody has talked about, and I'm using the word summation in my own way, it's not, you won't find it defined like this, but summation is the process through which your capabilities are improved when you have increasing amounts of data and an increasing number of perspectives available to you. John Seeley Brown wrote about a little article, not an academic article, but an article for Forbes ASAP about 10 years ago about authenticity in the net. And what he talked about is, a long time ago, if you did a fake photograph of, say, Jane Fonda shaking hands with Hitler, I'm exaggerating for effect, but nevertheless, a lot of people would believe it, and they would continue to believe it, and there was no way to contradict them, because the person who had the knowledge that that was fake, could put the pieces together, was not connected, and did too many degrees of separation from you to get the information to you. Nowadays, if you run a Photoshop photograph, somebody is going to come up with the pieces of it within about 2 to 3 days. And so that's just one example. What makes that happen is that you've got lots of different perspectives now, all around the net, and there are a lot of effects of that. One is that you're able to distribute responsibility and activities much further. You don't really need centralized control as much as you're used to, and that causes a lot of problems. But overall, summation is along with externalities, are the two effects which seem to really drive up the value of connectivity. Summation is normally used as a neurological term. I went blind in one eye. A year later, they gave me a new lens. This eye now saw perfectly. This old OB eye, that I would have since I was born, now sees like 20/30. And this one sees 20/20. So when I went back for my 1-year checkup, I said to the doctor, "You said that this eye is perfect and this eye is really suboptimal because the lens is a lot thicker, so it sees everything in sepia tone, just like a newsreel. But when I use both eyes, things look better than when I just look through my perfect eye." And he said that's because vision involves summation. It's the sum total of all of the data that you get. And what John Seeley Brown taught me to be aware of is it's also important to have a number of different perspectives, the wisdom of crowds, so to speak, that lead to what the Buddhists call the middle way. You don't get overwrought in any one direction. Yeah. So, what's important about netness and the idea of connectivity beyond networks is what I've been calling the principle of inclusive advantage. And what that means is that the more inclusive your inputs and resources, it's kind of a no-brainer that the more inputs and resources you have to call on, the greater your potential opportunity is going to be. So I've been trying to define the value of connectivity in economic terms. And there is no such principle in the economic textbooks. It's just a new idea that actually popped into my head as I was watching Susan Crawford, who's one of the heroes of governmental connectivity, struggle not to blow up at the telcos on stage at a convention that Mary Beth Henry is sitting on, who supervises, and David, who supervises connectivity for the city of Portland, asked me to go to. And I'm going to say it again. The more inclusive your inputs and resources, the greater your potential opportunity. And we already talked about the fact that networks sub-optimize connectivity. They make it really good for some people, but for a lot of connections, they make it really tough. And so when you begin to think of connectivity and embrace connectivity beyond networks, not being limited by networks, when you begin thinking more in terms of making networks porous, ad hoc, unable to stop anything that isn't clearly and explicitly a threat, you begin to increase your opportunity. The only problem is it isn't a very good business model for the people who own the networks, and they do everything they can to stop it. And so one of the roles of understanding netness is to begin to try and get us into a world of better governance, where businesses make their money not by owning and limiting connectivity and keeping it scarce, but where they make their money by building on top of rich connectivity. And so we can democratize access and all have a lot of opportunity. So another important thing which has just kind of popped out in the last 6 months is a whole bunch of new research which has hit the papers, begin to hit scientific papers, and amazingly some of the books, at least one book came out before the papers came out, and that is research which suggests that humans, the human species, are uniquely talented at connecting and collaborating. At the very same time as technology has given us better means of connecting and collaborating, it turns out that that's what is our that's one of our secret sauces, things that we do really well, and it's one reason that we're entering a new age, which could be very, very good, as well as the opposite. Why we cooperate is about primate studies, which show that human children are proactively wired to help other people and to reach out and connect with other people empathetically. Whereas the closest primates to us, physically and genetically, are not. A young child, a year old, will reach down and pick up something that you've dropped and hand it to them. A one-year-old chimp will not. And that's been focused in a number of different ways. There's a new book out called Super Cooperators, which it thrilled me when I read the first review of it in Science Magazine. I just read you the subtitle. It says, Altruism, Evolution, and Why We Need Each Other to Succeed. So it's good that we have that ability, because facing the current situation in our world, we really need to radically improve our ability to cooperate and collaborate. We need to maximize efficiency, and we need to minimize waste by a large factor if we're going to survive this time when we have limited resources, but climate change. And we need to do this in order to mitigate the risks and optimize the outcomes for individuals, communities, and species. We are losing more species right now than we ever have in the history of the planet. And no meteorite has hit us. It's just like Malthusian problems. Too much for the planet and not looking out for things. So one of the things that we have to suddenly and very rapidly get very good at is what I call unintended conversations. These are the conversations you didn't think you were going to have to need, and you didn't think we were going to need to make certain happen. One of the effects of everything getting more and more connected, because not all of it's good, is that we begin to have more are called black swan events. These are events where things come together in ways that we couldn't have anticipated, such as an earthquake causing a tsunami that hits a nuclear plant that had shoddy construction, which then brings down the entire world in a certain way. And when that happens, you need, for a lot of different things, to be working together to tell you what the situation is, and not to hide it, and to also have things be able to work together in ways which will optimize and mitigate the problems. So you need to have more inclusive conversations, even though it sounds funny to say it, between people, places, devices, sensors, everything. And the problem is you never know what you're going to need to work together. So that's why you need really to connect potentially everything. So unfortunately I used to do marketing, so I keep doing these mantras. So the new mantra for this one is everything needs a voice, everything has something to say. An acquaintance of mine helps design sensors for dikes. The entire nation of Holland, the Netherlands, depends on their ability to keep the North Sea from flowing in and messing things up. And they depend on the dikes to do it. And the dikes are not done the way we build Hoover Dam. They couldn't. There's no way actually it wouldn't be as sustainable as what they do. They work in a very ecological way, measuring forces, building earthen things, basically kind of working with natural structures. But as we know from the United States, when you have an earthen dam or an earthen dike, a lot of times they erode and the water goes pouring in and people die, et cetera, et cetera. What they've begun to do is to put microphones inside throughout the dikes, and they listen to the dikes talk. And they learn to analyze when the dikes need a little more help. And yes?
I really like how everything needs a voice.
That's
it's
right.
Really dark, so you have to be paying attention and be aware, just like you have to pay attention and be aware to find your own voice.
Yes, that's right. And finding your own voice in a connected world is sometimes too easy and other times really, really hard. So we get to this situation where we've got this world in which we've got things which extend from particles and individuals to the world as a whole. And what we begin to see emerging in this field of connectivity are what I've been calling virtuous service fabrics. And that is a set of kind of protocols in which if there's a problem, all the things which are connected tend to step in and do something about it. It sounds a little scary. People are very scared of it, but they fight like crazy to get the new BMWs, which if you begin to drive poorly, slowly take control of the car away from you. And if you mesh down really hard, they begin to like give you less response to your hitting the accelerator. They think if the car knows that it's going to tip over. Today, most high-end cars check the condition and driving circumstances at about 1,000 times a second. And we're seeing that kind of frequency and that kind of awareness widely in a lot of different situations. So this is stories are very useful for communicating what you can do in technology, and I developed a story about what you could do about an 80-year-old man. He lives in Toronto. He doesn't want to live with his daughter because he doesn't want to give up internet porn. He doesn't want to live in an old age home. He lives in a studio with a tub with a shower. And if he wants to take a shower, he has to climb into the tub, and he has to wash his hair. He has to reach all the way up for the soap. And he lives by himself, and he takes a shower, this 80-year-old man. And the other thing I want to say is that this story told with typography is the work of Bram Patoyo, who used to be kind of the king geek typographer for Portland, now in Delhi, and who did these slides for me. And he worked out a way to tell the story with font, which I really liked. So this 80-year-old man begins to take a shower, and he reaches for the soap and he slips. And this is how most 80-year-old men come to their end often. And when he falls into the tub, what if the tub knows that the man has fallen? The tub knows that he has osteoporosis. The tub knows, and then he proceeds to contact. And when I say he contacts, the tub doesn't just send one call out to 911. The tub, which uses voice over internet protocol, sends out 200 calls, all in milliseconds, until one of them gets to a 911 operator who picks up. So, and at the same time, the tub calls the old man's father, calls the building super, who is 2 floors away, because if the old man, when he hits, breaks a femur, he will bleed out in 7 minutes. That's how fast it takes to die if you break your femur. And you have osteoporosis, you are very likely to break your femur. And the geriatric service, which has a video feed and which checks to see that the old man is okay. So the old man is still falling as these calls go out. And the tub proceeds to rearrange its molecules. And so that when the man hits the tub catches it. So that sounds like a fantasy story. It's about 5 years away in technology, maybe sooner. Already there's a technologist in Portland that has a tub that senses when somebody's falling and pops a airbag to catch him. But I'll give you another less pervasive, a less intrusive, an active version of the same thing, and that is an experiment that has really been adopted now because it's been so successful, that Intel did with elder care, where it all it did was put sensors in the floor of the elder care. Not invasive, isn't over listening to conversations, isn't asking what that guy is looking at on the TV, on the computer. But what happens is, as the feedback from what those floor sensors show, it shows immediately when the footsteps of the elder person begin to systematically become random. And that is a very, very early tip-off of neurological problems. And it allows intervention. And in many cases, when an older person has neurological problems, sometimes they're just having to do a presentation overnight a couple of times. And sometimes it's, the bad stuff.
Dishman.
I'm sorry?
Dishman.
Yeah.
That's his word.
Dishman, right. So the point is that they are now able, just by putting sensors in the floor, without bothering people, to tell when they need help, when they might need help. That's an example of how subtle things can be. And there's a great news paper in last week's Science magazine, which shows landscapes, what happens to those landscapes when they lose one tiny little species that you wouldn't think is important, like a snail darter. The entire landscape goes to hell in a handbasket over a period of time. So you need to know how connectivity works, what things are really connected to, what's really important, and in most cases, we don't. So this is what's going on, and this has been a quick ride through the amusement park of connectivity. But the reason that I wanted to talk about this here is because this store is an incredible resource for people who like to make things. What this new category of person called makers. And if you want to know what a maker is, I suggest a book called Makers, which you can download from craphound.com for free if you want to, which really describes the character and what the opportunities are and what happens when it goes awry. But makers are definitely beginning to change the world. So what makers need to do is to begin by understanding that every day it becomes more important to be able to connect, communicate, and collaborate anywhere with anything on an ad hoc basis. We used to believe that what was important for us to do was to have faster systems. That was Moore's law. Everything was focused on doubling the power of the computer. It's really not so important how fast you can get your blender to 60 miles per hour, as much as it's important that everything that you have will work with everything else that you need it to work with when you need it to work with, even though you might not have planned to work it. You don't want to get to the point where you have to change the tire and find that the tire iron you have doesn't happen to fit that particular tire. And Chevrolet, to replace the tire iron will only do it if they can replace the built-in jack system for $600. That's a typical situation today. So the next opportunities are not, as everybody's all focused on networks. Typically the next opportunity, the next big opportunity, is something that lies between the networks. It's the thing which is not connected. It's the thing which is not cared for. I did a feature film on homicide once, and when people die, get killed, is when they wander into a place where they don't know the rules, and they aren't able to read the signals, and they behave inappropriately or in a risky way in that environment, whereas in their home environment it might be perfectly normal room. So you get lost out in the Oregon wilderness in a snowstorm, you're out of gas, your cell phone is running out of rope, and you don't have a signal because there's cell tower there for Verizon, but you're on AT&T. And the father gets out and starts walking to try and get help. He's lost, and although he's a very famous Yahoo executive, he dies in the snow. Somebody finally figures out that they could analyze the one cell call that they got. They could analyze the cell tower information. They're able to triangulate them, and at the same time the husband is dying, they're able to rescue the wife. But the telcos say that the cell tower information is private and doesn't belong to the public. So the next opportunity, the big opportunity, the most important thing to do is to connect the unconnected. That's always going to be your next big opportunity. When you connect the unconnected, you increase your opportunity and your likelihood of success. And typically, when somebody comes along and they have a product and a culture around that product and systems around that product that connect out in new ways to new things, that extend what you can do, what you can reach, extend functionality without necessarily increasing price, that's when you begin to see a big win. So, on the other hand, if you reduce connectivity, almost inevitably, you decrease opportunity. And more importantly, you decrease the safety of users. A user can't call for help, can't get coordinating information, and that is why right now, when BART cut off 2 hours of cell phone, they didn't know what they were doing. They thought they were keeping themselves from sliding into another London situation, but what they've done is totally ostracized themselves because they didn't understand the new laws of netness. You need to have connectivity if you're going to have success and sustainability. You need it for safety. People who, if you've raised children, you know that when you lose sight of your child, that children who are not watched, children who are not connected, so to speak, those are the children who are at risk. And it's the thing you really learn quickly. So we need to, right now, a lot of connectivity is cut off because of security, and so when you're designing products, you need to design a product which is as open as possible, that has as little security as possible, only the security that it needs. So we have to begin to explore ways of doing what I like to call conditional openness that enables anything to connect and collaborate, so that when it needs to. And we have to begin to go towards a world where we don't have walled gardens. And I think most of us know what walled gardens are. They're platforms, people, technology, services that you can't get your hands on. They're out of your reach, and they're owned by corporations that are operated for profit only and don't care whether people don't do well. So I had to put this in because it's true, but I've learned this from you guys in this community more than anybody has learned it from me, and that is that when you're beginning to think about connectivity and making products and systems, your best bet is always going to be open source, open systems, open access, and zero config. You want easy and friction-free UX. In other words, you want things to get out. You want the technology to become invisible, and people can just use it. And when you do that, it makes it easier for people to use it. It makes it easier to mash up and combine things. If you look at the way Amber and Aaron have decided to structure their new location technology, it's designed so that almost anybody's going to be able to use it. And more importantly, it's designed to help with location in situations where multiple things are on the move. That's what most services are not designed for, and yet that is the rule of life. I was working on doing a video disc based on Grey's Anatomy at UCLA with the person who was the chief anatomist in charge of the new version of Grey's Anatomy, and he spent a day showing me around anatomy. We went traipsing down the various canals with cameras, but it was all simulations or pictures or models. And at the end of that time, I said what I always say when I'm like on a fact collecting job: what is it that I don't understand that I didn't hear you say today? And he said, what you don't understand, because I didn't say it, but I'll tell you now, is that everything you've seen today in the body is always in motion. Well, that's true in reality. Everything's always in motion. So when is it really hard to get connected to people that you want to connect to? It's when they're in motion and you're in motion. You know, they come around, you go behind the barn at State Fair, and you can like go on for a long time. So the important thing is to begin to leverage a greater, what they call in public safety, situational awareness, to have as much connectivity as possible. Everybody wins that way. The other thing is to think in terms when you're doing a product. Don't just go along to get along and do something that fits like Microsoft Windows and nothing else. Focus on connecting laterally across silos, not vertically. If you want to like get to new value, make things work better, go sideways. Look at what you haven't been looking at before. Everybody always looks where they're going. They don't want the effort of looking around. They don't want to learn all this other stuff. But in things like healthcare, in things like education, things like public safety, it's connecting laterally, which begins to produce the improved services and lower costs that we're going to need. So you need to embrace connectivity, but embrace a kind of a 360 connectivity, but especially a lateral connectivity. And Carver Mead told me that Shockley, the inventor of the transistor, showed him a diagram, a scientific diagram, that he said, prove this, that you always had more opportunity in terms of discovering things and producing good products when you headed out in sideways, as opposed to following the stream of normal technology. And for makers, especially people who are making at the edge, not making at the center where they're in a big fancy lab like Xerox PARC, but where they're at the edge in a garage, being smart to look at the stuff in a fresh way as the thundering herd goes in a straight thing. That's what connectivity allows you to do if you're willing to embrace it. So everything is connected implicitly. What you need to do is to recognize and make connectivity explicit if you want to use it to make things better or make better things. I mean, that's, for makers, that's what it comes down to, right? Besides having fun and drinking good craft beer, make things better or make better things. So at a certain point, people said, enough of this talk, when are you going to do something that uses these ideas? So a lot of the people in this room have actually been going out and doing things using these principles, and I decided that I better start doing it too. So for 4 years, I've been trying to work first on that idea of mapping connectivity in a way that almost anybody could use. So I've been working and trying, most recently with Anselm Hook of Hook.org here in Portland, and the co-founder of Maker Lab, on producing an image of the whole connected Earth. And the reason I wanted to produce an image of the whole connected Earth is because it's pretty well documented that when they finally got a picture of the whole Earth, people started to change the way they thought about this planet and were more willing to be aware of that it was not infinite in its opportunities. So I'm going to have to leave this slide presentation and show you why this is not a good image of the whole connected Earth. It is an image of the way, it's the most famous image of the way the internet is wired globally, but it's flat. So what Anselm did for me is, we were trying to do this real and do it where you could geographically connect all of these servers that you see and all these connections so that they're accurate, so that you could fly into this map and begin to see exactly what it was what kind of connectivity geography you had in your local area. So this is where we're headed. I don't know if you can see that over there, but this is the planet Earth wrapped in connectivity. And the more we can like build something that shows you what connectivity is like, because connectivity is like almost the most critical infrastructure you have as things get more complicated and more difficult. And we're not there yet. This was a first pass, but CAEDA, which is at the University of California, San Diego Supercomputer Center, which is the main coordinating institution in the world for mapping internet, has agreed to provide us with the data so that we can build a connected and create a real image of the whole connected Earth. Now, but actually, we still won't be there when we can make this geographically correct, because this is only the hard wiring of the internet. It only is where the hard wires go, where the servers are. It's not where the connectivity goes, and it's not where the users use connectivity. So we've got to figure out, it's one of those it turned out to be another mile deep mud puddle. And how do you begin to like describe the new geography, which connectivity creates, global geography, and how do you represent it so people can actively use it? And I'll tell you that my long-term desire, is to create an application which people sign their cell phones and tabs and everything they use, that they hook it, it automatically sends a signal to tell people where they're getting connectivity and at what the quality is. And if I do that, then you can know before you choose a motel that doesn't have a Wi-Fi signal when you have a report due. And in other words, it's basically taking the idea of a wiki, which Ward Cunningham invented here in Portland, and applying it to, in effect, sensor nets. And that's, I think, what we're going to. Ward is now reinventing the wiki, as most of you know, and I'm really anxious to see how this new version of it comes out. But I think that one of the things that he has implicitly been doing and been thinking about, even though he hasn't been talking about it, is marrying wikis and sensor nets and other kinds of safety and conditional issues, so that automatically we can begin to move into a world which cooperates in helping us stay safe and do what we want to do. So we'll say goodbye to this and thank Anselm for whipping this out in a hurry, and we'll go back to this. Sorry for we couldn't figure out how to get this to do it the way we wanted to do it. Oh no, that isn't what we want. I apologize for this. We're just not quite connected there. Okay, so speaking personally, I'm obsessed with connectivity because I grew up very isolated, and when you're isolated as a child, you're in trouble. So I ended up with a lot of things, unpleasant things happening to me, and it happens to children all over. It happens to anybody who's in a weakened state, and connectivity is one of the ways in which you're able to take care of people who need extra help. So one of the things that I've been talking to the city about, and I've been working with Don Westlight, who's sitting in front of me, who understands technology and networks the way I don't understand them. He understands how they really work and what they really cost and what you really do, is to find a way to begin bringing the idea of the field to Portland. And when I'm talking about the field, I'm talking about having places where you have whole city blocks, public spaces of abundant connectivity at symmetrical 100 and 200 megabits a second, up and down, where you begin to have what's called in connectivity presence, where when you're talking to somebody, it really is if you're in the same space, you're in the same moment. You're already metaphorically in the same moment with this entangled kind of connectivity which is developing, but this takes it to the next step. And what it requires to do that, you have to reduce the latency, and to get the latency to you have to have really strong connectivity, stronger than we have right now. And in Europe, places like the Netherlands, they have these very large research and education networks, which have that kind of speeds and which enable people to get their work done really fast and to connect to a lot of knowledge that would otherwise drive you crazy if you were in a budget 6 trying to go at, to use their broadband, which runs at dial-up speeds. And so, but it's more than just that. It's changing the way you look at connectivity. So you think of it as a natural resource that everybody has a right to have. And you have that happening in Europe. You have some countries which has specified that every citizen must have access to at least 1 megabit of connectivity. In other places, you have average speeds of 10. And David just came back. Just came back from Hong Kong, where a very aggressive group of communications people set up a business which focuses on delivering a gigabit of connectivity in fiber to the home for $25 a month. And in the US, the telcos don't like to go into places where low income. They want to go where people will pay tons, $200 for a fast connection. In Hong Kong, they don't want to serve the rich guys because it's much better if they go into the apartment blocks where they get lots of people. They want the maximum number of people to use, be able to buy that $25 gigabit. And it changes the opportunity of a whole generation of people in Hong Kong. And the reason that the Hong Kong government embraces it is because they need to stay smart so that they don't get gobbled up by mainland China. So this would be, the gigabit groves would be free 24/7 access, no splash page, no sign-on, no passwords, no problems. You open your laptop, you check your phone, you boot up your iPad, you're on. And what that means, if you do that in enough places in the city, it means you have a place to live where you can work anywhere, where you can do any kind of work, where you can learn anywhere, where you can access these big simulations. Because one of the things that's happening, nobody's talking about outside the scientific community, is that the amount of data which is generated in knowledge professions and in knowledge initiatives is doubling every year. Every year, we generate new amounts of data that are more than equal to all the data that we've ever generated to that point. And the result of that is it's as broadband spreads, it's all out there, and you begin to have citizen scientists, internet scientists working on it. So in the old days, you had 10,000 astronomers in the world, and they did all the work on astronomy, and discovery didn't go so fast. Nowadays, they put all that data in where anybody can get at it, and there are 300,000 people in the world actively doing astronomical research, even though they don't have a degree in astronomy. And you have a high school teacher who discovers a new planet. So it greatly increases our knowledge and improves. And by the way, it's my theory, but I won't know until we work on it more, that if we can get a lot of high bandwidth users off of the 3G telephone system and put them on these gigabit groves, that the telcos will be free to sell more of their high profitability 3G services. And it won't be swallowed up. I don't know if any of you have had a First Thursday, you have 4 bars and you can't even call a dog catcher. Because there's so many people sucking down on that there's no 3G left. So the third project that I'm working on, and unfortunately I must tell you it takes me a long time to work on stuff, and eventually sometimes they actually get done, is the augmented hearing project, and that's rethinking the hearing aid. A lot of geeks are hearing impaired, starting with Vince Cerf, the father of the internet. He and his wife are very hearing impaired. We have a lot of people here in Portland who are hearing impaired. I had a lot of friends, and I began to, when I was having a conversation one night with somebody from Zen Buddhism, and when he has a conversation with you, he has to hang a microphone around your neck. Then he can hear you. The microphone falls off, it doesn't pick up the surrounding information, there's any interference. He can have a quality conversation with you. Now that hearing aid, which is pretty simple, only costs him $8,000. He only has one microphone. So if he's trying to have a conversation at a family dinner, the microphone's got to go up and down, or if he's at a conference or something like that. So most people who have hearing have problems have really bad problems. The idea in augmented hearing is to turn, is to make these, is to rethink these hearing services as personal networks. It's no longer a device you wear in your ear. One of the things that we learned from Amber Case is that there are lots of different ways to be augmented, and that we're unaware of how rich and wide are the varieties. But I thought, what if you took the processor, because when you have a hearing aid, the battery power, the processor, the speaker, and the controls all have to go in this little thing, and it has to fit in your ear. But what if you shifted all of that stuff to an iPhone? Starting in September or October, whenever Steve Jobs is happy, we're going to have a new kind of iPhone that has an A5 processor in it, which is as powerful as most people's desktops were 5 years ago, and can do a lot more processing of algorithms to improve things, shape sound, get rid of distractions, run multiple services at once. So the augmented hearing project is a project in which we're trying to do a reference model. I'm going to try and work with OHSU because they do a lot of work in hearing. They're very focused on telemetrics now, and we have this resource, at least right now, of Don, who's there running the networks. So at least somebody will give me a straight story. And we're going to try and figure out how we can move all of that stuff to the iPhone. And it's all wireless. That's where we're headed, folks. It's all wireless. There can be very few cords and very few connectors. One of the main Mac veterans said, if you want to know where Apple's taking us, it's taking us to a world where there aren't any USB ports or even Thunder optic link. Everything's going to be wireless. So you wear a little plug in your ear. It's a speaker and a tiny little battery, probably, and a little tiny radio. And that battery probably can be fed off of, some of it off of just random energy that's around. There's a lot of things that have been done at MIT, just sucking down natural kinetics. So no more cords. Meanwhile, you've got your iPhone, which everybody has with them almost everywhere they go, except when they can't find it. And in the iPhone is a much more powerful, a much bigger battery, a much more powerful processing capability, and the ability to do software as apps, which can't low cost. And so we can have a hearing aid that gives you a display and you can manage it. So you can put a lot of cheap microphones, $5 microphones with little cheap radios around the family table at Thanksgiving, and the guy with the hearing problem can just sit there and dial his teenage granddaughter down, because what she wants to do is sing Gaga songs, and so on and so forth. He can continually adjust to the social circumstances. That you can also put in things like conversation playback. People who are hard of hearing often want to record conversations, phone or live, so that they can analyze them to see what they've missed. It's not done in a sneaky way. It's a natural necessity. And the other thing, which we've all been trying to use for a long time, is voice to text. And people kept saying it worked, and it didn't work because it needed a whole lot more processing power than anybody admitted. The A5 has enough processing power to make Dragon work really well. So, if you have a hearing problem, you can do a lot of different things with that. You've got your little iPhone along, and you can surreptitiously, while you're listening on the phone to a conversation, see a lot of the conversation displayed in real time. If you're in a room with somebody and you're talking, the phone through the microphone, the one that's in the iPhone or the others that you'd like spread around, can pick it up. If you're streaming news or anything that has voice and audio information which you need to know, you can pick that up too. So most hearing people are really, without the rest of us knowing it, second-class citizens. This is a way to turn them to first class, and maybe even in some ways make them better at hearing than we are. So the thing is, a lot of those services are already built into smartphones. GarageBand is a mixing board. You can get voice to text for $15 on an iPhone. It doesn't work very well. It's going to work a lot better when we have the A5. So the point is that individual users can adjust those things to their needs. They can mix and match. And they don't. More and more, we're going to see a lot of patient participation in taking responsibility for improving our impairments when we can. And this is an example of the way you can do it. This is netness thinking. This is not belonging to anybody else's network. It's having your own network that you own. And it uses something called Bluetooth 3.0. Most of us use Bluetooth 2.0. Works like shit. It's only good for like 6 meters, something like that. Maybe on a good day when the wind isn't blowing. Bluetooth 3.0 works for 135 feet, and it's broadband. It can transmit video between people. You don't need a network around to do it. You can just plant your microphones around, or have other family members who you interact with regularly put Bluetooth 3.0 on their phones. They don't have to put it on the phones because it's Bluetooth 3.0 is native to iPhone and has been for 2 years, but nobody knows about it. And so it means that you can connect to your ears at the same time as you can connect to the microphones, at the same time as you can listen to calls, at the same time as you can listen to feedback. Almost, the point is it also supports multi-streaming. The main thing is people can adjust the augmented services to their own personal needs. It's an empowerment. Now, the most important thing of all is in planning to do it with an open source platform with a public architecture. Hearing devices are really expensive, much more expensive than I ever dreamed. It's not unusual for the VA to pop for $20,000 for somebody who's had hearing impaired from a roadside device going off. Using this new augmented hearing system, you'll be able to reduce the cost of very sophisticated services by 100 times or more. There's no, and what that means is that a lot of people who can't afford good hearing are going to have it. It's another example. So it's going to do more and it's going to cost less. So those are 3 different things. But my impression, and I showed this to Amber recently, actually very influenced by talking to Amber every so often, is that human beings have this kind of basic instinct in which we want to be augmented. And it starts, my brother-in-law, who's an anthropologist, classical anthropologist, says it actually doesn't start with iPhones. She says it started with Lucy coming down from the trees and needing tools that made it easier for her to prepare food and things like that now that she had her hands free. But steadily we've tried to augment ourselves, and we've done it in different ways. If we're superstitious, we augment ourselves by wearing religious medals or makeup, which make us more attractive. But in everything we're doing, it's all about being able to connect more. That's what's the key thing about being a Borg? If you get Borg, you can connect to everybody else who's Borg, whether you want to or not. So, one last slide, one last thought. Trying to figure out what are these really big ideas about things are changing. And one of the guys I like talking with is Anselm Hook. And Anselm is very hung up on plasticity. And the fact that it's very efficient if you have a home that reshapes itself around you. Anselm is one of those guys who doesn't live in the present, he lives in the future. And so for him, I know a paleontologist who lives in the past with the dinosaurs every day. But Anselm lives in the future. And when he raised the issue of plasticity, I began paying a lot more attention to it. And what I realized is that all of a sudden, we're able to make a lot of things change into a lot of other things. There's a big fight, legal fight, medical fight about stem cells, how rare they were. There were only 200 stem cell colonies that were allowed in the entire United States. Suddenly they discovered that they could take skin cells and turn them into stem cells. And then they discovered that they could turn any kind of cells into stem cells. And then they discovered that they could teach you, if you were blind, to see light with your tongue, and so on and so forth. The point is that we have this new alchemy in which you can transform one material into another thing. And when you have the ability to transform one thing to another thing, you have the ability to naturally increase connectivity. You can begin to align principles and align characteristics that make it easier for things to work together. So that's another thing which is happening right now. I just thought I would toss that in. So that's everything I need to say today, except that everything wants to be connected. I really want to thank Bram Patoyo, who nobody paid much attention to my ideas until he began making them look really good and clear. In this case, he also used a man named Louis Montilla, who must be somebody on the net that he knows, who gave us. I said, it has to look like something that makers will like, and so he decided to do a blueprint. So I don't know how much time we have left for questions, but
Yeah, we can do some questions. So this is coming from somebody who's not even on the computer, but what is there anything? First of all, is there anything that really worries you about the process of connectivity personally? And if so, what is it? What's the scary part of this, if there is anything to you of this process of connectivity?
well, there was an early version of this presentation where it went into much more detail about how these ideas evolved. And it began with a dialogue between two people in the Himalayas, in Dharamsala, India. A group of the most famous quantum physicists in the world went to see the Dalai Lama to demonstrate quantum phenomena to him. And they did, but before they did, they said, we're going to show you some things that seem illogical and you might not believe. And then he quoted Niels Bohr, who was kind of the den mother for all the physicists who developed quantum physics in Copenhagen, who said that when you had normal truth, the opposite can be not true. But when you have deep truths, both one thing and its opposite can also be true. And the Dalai Lama thought for a moment and finally said, there certainly is truth to that. So there are a lot of opposite effects, and almost anything that happens, there's also a 180-degree version of it. And in connectivity, for example, it's that people can find you when they want to do bad things to you, or they can connect to you without you knowing it, and they can slip you spam, and so that they begin to be able to steal stuff from your keyboard. What happens in complexity and complex systems is we're going through a very fast evolution right now, and we're often overwhelmed by the complexity. And when I watch, my job used to be, when I worked for technology, was being what I called a delta artist. My job was to spot changes and recognize them before they were beginning to happen, which I could do because I couldn't do normal stuff, but I was very distracted, so I was always looking around all the time. And what I saw is that new technology would come out, and you would buy it because it was interesting, but you couldn't use it. It didn't feel good in your hand, it didn't fit in your pocket, and so on. But eventually the complexity would be tamed, and it would kind of like become part of your life, and then you would move on to the next kind of thing. And the same thing is true with levels of complexity in living systems and in networks and in connectivity generally. You go through periods when it gets out of control, you don't know how to do it, then you figure out how to do it, and you move to the next level. One thing that's clear, we're getting really smart at not only being good local citizens, but recognizing that we have to learn how to be good global citizens and to think globally as well as locally. And earlier versions of human species would never do that. We all played by schoolyard rules and were ready to rip the guts out of anybody who didn't wear the same tattoo as we did. So, but overall, because of the natural tendency to want to help people, connectivity tends to be useful as opposed to not useful. And there's books have been written about that too. I'm looking at a person here who helped invent a technology that I use every day and use to find the house. It was done here in Portland, right? It was the car that had all the cameras on it. And you helped figure out how to make all the cameras work together. And so the reason that you could drive anywhere in Portland on Google Maps and take a look at the street and figure out whether you wanted to live there was because this guy was very good with algorithms, stitching a lot of services together. Then, of course, Google found a cheaper way to do it. Yeah.
What do you think of cloud computing?
It's inevitable. My new mantra is the cloud above, the field below, access and rich services everywhere.
But that it's owned by one company.
That we don't want, and that we will not have.
Yes. Thank you.
And if I have to be in a cloud, let it be somebody like Amazon, who all they want to do is be efficient and get it done. Run by a European, not jingoistic. But here's this thing which really alerted me. There was a long time when I had these ideas, and I really suffered because I was obsessed with these ideas of connectivity, and everybody told me that I was really full of it. And they're right, I can't do mathematics, and I'm not a scientific thinker, but I knew it was right. And finally, in 2004, in January, I went to a Gartner summit on computing security, and the person in charge of security for AT&T networks stood up and said in answer to a question, 10 years ago we couldn't get networks to connect to each other, and now, goddamn it, we can't stop them from connecting. So what we're talking about is going to happen, but we need it to happen in the way we need it to happen, and we have to get controlled by small, self-interested groups as far out of the loop as possible, and that's not going to be easy, because connectivity is the most valuable thing we have to sell these days, because it's the one thing you can't do without. Yes, Jim?
Just in thinking about when you're talking to makers, you said two things that I want to know the balance of. One is that you were saying that we need to maximize efficiency and minimize waste. And the other one was when you were talking about entanglement and overlapping streams. I think you're implying that there will be redundancy.
There has to be redundancy. You want redundancy. Redundancy is part of nature.
So how do we find the balance, especially people who are makers? Find the balance
I think that
redundancy and being efficient.
We have to evolve. Jim, by the way, is doing a very special project. Who's it being done for, Jim? Who's the supervising?
It's CDC.
It's a CDC here, but you're working in Rome. And he is working with people who are tracking the development and spread and transmission of diseases between wildlife, domestic farm animals, and what was the third category?
And the environment.
And the environment. And for the first time, they're doing it across borders, which is the way you need to think about connectivity. Anyway, that's where I am. And if you come back next year, I'll have some more ideas.
Thank you so much. All right, thank you everybody for attending. August 30th, we're very excited to have Art in the Industry, a collaboration between Michael Downs, an industrial designer with deep roots within the bicycle industry, and Jeff Saylor, a master shipwright with a particular focus on wooden boats. Together, they are creating a wooden cargo bicycle that has been entered into the 2011 Oregon Manifest Constructors Challenge. We're going to talk about their process. It's really good. Thanks so much, everyone, for attending. Thanks again, Sheldon. It was fantastic.
Thank you.